This is my homemade micro off-road camper. Welcome, and thanks for checking out Trail in Pursuit. If you haven't done so already, check out the first video of my camper build. I'll put that link in the description below. In that video, I introduce my design process, and I get started with the build by constructing the main body of the camper. Coming up in this video, I build out the interior paneling and framing for the walls, and it finally starts to look like a camper. But first, it's time to build out the box for the galley. Looking back on this part of the build, I would probably say this is the one part of the pod that I would have done differently. I built the entire galley box out of 3/4 inch plywood, and I think that was a little bit unnecessary. It ended up being extremely heavy, as well as a little bit redundant in terms of strength. If I did it over again, I would still leave the top, bottom, and sides as the 3/4 inch plywood, but I wouldn't use an entire sheet for the backing. I would probably just panel it like I did the rest of the interior of the pod, and then add braces where necessary, for example where the shelves were located, and maybe some corner bracing. So now that I had the main foam body mocked up and the galley box built, I moved on to the interior. For the flooring of the camper, I used 3/4 inch plywood, which a regular 4x8 sheet is a little bit smaller than the overall dimensions of my camper. So I just routed a half lap joint or a shiplap joint and added on a little bit of an extension for the width and length. And for the walls and ceiling, I used this 3mm plywood and laminated it to the inside of the foam insulation. For my framing, I took a 3/4 inch plywood and ripped it down to 1.5 inch strips and then laminated 2 pieces together. I knew this would be fairly lightweight, more than strong enough, but still be a little bit flexible as the camper bounces around up and down the roads. Once all the framing pieces were cut to their final lengths, I just used pocket hole joinery to hold it all together. Using a simple squaring jig like this is great for small pieces, and a little bit of glue and some quality screws. This joint will pretty much outlast most other things on the camper. One of the biggest questions I had when researching how to build this camper was, how the heck do you attach anything to foam board insulation? Turns out these drywall anchors with some expanding foam Gorilla Glue creates an extremely strong bond. I didn't measure the strength on these myself, but on tests I've seen people do, they withheld over 80 pounds of pulling force. And 1 or 2 of them I had glued in, inserted a screw, grabbed some pliers, and did my best to pull it out. And when it did finally come out, it was still very well attached to the foam, and it was the foam around it that had given out. In addition to the drywall screws, I used this general purpose foam adhesive, which was probably overkill considering there were 36 drywall screws in the floor, and at 80 pounds a piece, That would mean it would take almost 3,000 pounds to separate the plywood from the foam. So I think it's plenty strong. So for the ceiling and wall panels, I use the same process, but instead of using 3/4 inch plywood like I did on the floor, I use this thin 3mm paneling. Then I attached the frames around the edges. From there, I essentially just had a camper kit, and all I had to do was piece it together. It was a little bit of a process to figure out how to apply glue to the foam, to the wood, attach the pieces, and then screw it all together, but it worked out pretty good. From there, with all the pieces together, I was able to actually sit inside the camper and get a good feel for the size. And that really helped me to determine the final layout for the shelves and the windows and the door and the roof vent. While I didn't really enjoy using the hot wire making lots of cuts, it did come in handy for things like this where I needed a little bit more precise of a cut in the middle of a piece of foam. Once I had the shape cut out of the foam, I could then drill pilot holes through to the plywood on the other side, and that would give me my markings for cutting out from underneath. Most of this project was trial and error, and like I said, this isn't how you should do it, this is how I did it. I was basically just figuring things out along the way. And for this vent, the door, and the windows, I kind of erred on the side of making the opening too small, because then I knew I could just enlarge it rather than have to find a way to fill in a gap if I cut it too big. And in this foam and thin plywood, it was pretty easy to test fit and adjust it as needed. And there were many times, especially on the door and windows, where I would just sit for 30 minutes or an hour and think about what I was doing before I did it, because I knew I had to plan for not just the windows to fit, but the exterior shell and the canvas and the paint, the weather stripping, any seals I might use, and I really had to sit and think about the direction of water flow and the best way to prevent it from making its way inside the camper. I have to say this step was pretty cool and a really good motivation to keep pushing through, because it was finally starting to look like an actual camper. From then, I added a couple of shelves to my galley and finished the layout on the inside and the positioning of each of my shelves. And like I said, it really started to look like an actual camper. From then I moved on to the electrical, laying out all my wires, deciding on the positioning for my lights, interior and exterior, running wires to the vent, and all of my outlets. I wanted to test fit the wiring and especially the outdoor lights before applying the exterior shell, because I wanted as few holes and as small holes as possible to maintain a basically unbroken barrier from weather and moisture, and that would hopefully give all the seals the best chance for success. Since I wanted to avoid cutting into the foam and the paneling whenever possible, I decided to go with the surface mounting of the wires, and this cord cover worked extremely well actually. And one added benefit to doing it this way is in the future, if I ever want to replace wiring or add any outlets or have to fix anything, all I have to do is pop off the top of that cover, lay a new wire, and put it back on, and I'm done. For the door of the camper, I decided to build my own, which I may not recommend everybody do. It is kind of a complicated process, but I knew I had the skills to do it, and I kind of enjoy the problem solving, so it was fun for me. One of the easiest ways I can describe this process is if you've ever done any kind of basic woodworking and built any kind of box with a opening lid on it, one of the most accurate ways to line up the lid with the body is to build a complete box first and then simply just cut the lid off. So I basically used that process when I built the door. Instead of cutting a hole in the camper and then taking an entirely new piece to build the door, I just cut the hole and then use that cutout section as the door itself. That way, if for whatever reason my hole was not perfectly square or my door was not perfectly square, it didn't really matter. They would still match up. To add strength to any of the mounting points on the whole camper or the door, including the latch and the hinges and things like that, I simply just routed an inset into the foam and then used the Gorilla Glue to attach a wood support, and any screws for my hinges or mounts could be attached directly to the wood. After several test fits and adjustments, all my mounting hardware, windows, door, and vent were ready to go. I could then start on the exterior of the camper. If you're enjoying this video and you want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel so you can catch some more cool outdoor content. In the next episode, I apply a technique commonly called poor man's fiberglass to seal the exterior, and you'll finally get to see the finished inside as I give you a walk around of the completed camper. Be sure to share this video and leave any comments below, any questions you might have. And always a big thanks for checking out Trail in Pursuit.